Let's resume our walk through the book of Job at the point of chapter 2. Here we find the second encounter between the Lord and Satan. Incidentally, a comment may be in order about the expression of the character Satan. In Hebrew, it's routinely accompanied in this book by the definite article, literally translated, the Satan. This is a reminder to us that the word Satan has a meaning. It's not simply a casual reference to an individual, but it means adversary, pronounced Satan. So to say ha-Satan, the Satan, is to say the adversary. So an interesting sidelight as to the character of this supernatural being who stands in opposition, not equivalent to the Lord in any way, but a supernatural being who stands and operates in opposition to the God of Israel, Ha-Satan, the adversary. As we find this second episode, the second encounter between the Lord and Satan unfolding, you'll notice that the language is very similar to the first, except that the response of Job to the misfortune that he has undergone is taken into consideration. Notice in particular that the Lord's assessment of him is identical to what we found in chapter 1, but then we find this addition in verse 3. He still persists in his integrity. The Hebrew here uses two words, the first of which, ve'odenu, indicates that this individual, the subject being referred to, Job, keeps on doing something, and then what it is he keeps on doing, machazik, it has the idea of becoming strong, or we might say resolute. In other words, exactly the opposite of what Ha-Satan, the adversary, thought would happen, has in fact eventuated. Job has responded to his undeserved misfortune by, in essence, fortifying himself to be unswervingly pious, even in the face of the undeserved difficulties. Satan responds by saying, well, let's ratchet up the degree of suffering so that it affects his own body, not simply his possessions and his family, to which, as you are aware, the Lord responds, go ahead, but keep him alive. An interesting provision, or a piece to build into this test, isn't it? Initially, I have generally thought, well, that is mercy. The Lord says, come, you may test him, you may harm his body, but don't make it a mortal test. Don't actually kill him. I want him still alive. From another vantage point, however, this is in essence shall we say, it's almost a curse. For if death came to Job, a couple of things would happen. For one thing, we know he would be released from this test. The test would be over. And if you've known someone who knows the Lord and is suffering, perhaps at the end of a long life illness, you have encountered the sentiment, I just wish the Lord would take me home. How much Job understood about the afterlife and this being something positive for him to look forward to as a faithful servant of the Lord, we want to be cautious reading too much of the New Testament understanding of the resurrection of believers into the Old. Nevertheless, there is this possibility that it would have been for him an escape. Even he wishes that at times, don't we find that he will wish that his life would draw to a close, or at least that it had never begun. He wishes that he could escape the test. So, verse 6 of chapter 2, while appearing to be merciful, in one sense is not so generous. And here's the other dimension. The test through which Job is passing will only yield beneficial information. That is there an upright person who can be subjected to undeserved suffering and still, in essence, bob up on the other side like a cork coming through a storm? Will it bob up and still remain faithful to God? we only have the answer to that if this person is still alive. As soon as the person perishes, then we have no way to extract the information. There can be no recovery of data as to whether or not the person passed the test or failed the test. In essence, the test gets unplugged at that point. So these are some of the dynamics that are at work in verse 6 when the Lord says, very well, he's in your power, but don't kill him. Then we learn of the disease that Job experiences, the great misery he is under. We learn that his closest family member, his wife, says, get it over with, turn your back on God, expressed by cursing him, and then bring your life to an end. Just die as a result of turning your back on God seems to be the implication, which we, from the omniscient viewpoint of the writer, privy as we are to this heavenly conversation that Job knows nothing about, we know that would indeed end the test. But Job remains resolute and does not sin with his lips. Chapter 2 then ends by letting us know that there are 3 individuals, acquaintances of Job, who are going to make their way to meet with him once they've heard about the misfortune that has come to him. The remainder of the book is dominated by the conversation then between Job and these 3 individuals, plus a 4th, Elihu, who will join the group. It's important to notice how they respond initially. There is immense value in what these 3 do, although we will differ with some of the content of their, sometimes it's remonstrating with Job, trying to correct him, trying to get him on the right path. And we find out towards the end of the book that they were misguided. But their beginning is very exemplary. They leave what they're doing, they get up, they travel, they go to console and comfort him. They weep with him, verse 12. They join in the outward expression of their inward grief, so they are empathizing with him on a profound level, tearing their ropes, throwing dust in the air on their heads. And then verse 13, they spend a week and they are simply quietly with him. I don't know about you, but I have not spent anywhere near that time just quietly being with someone in their grief. This is an enormous positive example. And some have observed that perhaps the best thing they ever did was what they did for this first week, and then things go downhill from there. That's being a bit too critical, because there is a place for words, there is a place for sharing ideas so that we may orient our thought towards truth, and that's what they try to do. But their beginning is a very powerful model for ministry. A number of years ago, I heard a sermon by an individual who was involved in street ministry. It was a program in Seattle, Washington called Night Watch, and he would put on a clerical collar, which wasn't his customary garb, in order to be readily identified by the people on the rougher edge of life in Skid Row, Seattle. They would know this person was entering their community, walking the streets of Seattle literally at night as an ally to them. And his comment about this kind of incarnational ministry, immersing himself in their world, was this, and it stuck with me for a number of years. He said, it's impossible to set a broken leg from across the street. It's impossible to set a broken leg from across the street. You've got to be there with the people. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar demonstrate this, being there. We need to be sure that in our expression of ministry, when people are in need, we are there with them and for them.